Hello and welcome to Rajya Sabha Television. You're watching The Big Picture with me, Frank Pereira. The Indian economy is facing a slowdown, and Prime Minister and his Economic Advisory Council are of the view that the government needs to form a GST council-like body to strategize expenditure and have maximum impact. Various suggestions have been made to curb the decline in economic activity that has lasted more than a few months. Pointing out the success of the GST Council body for decisions about indirect taxes, the Economic Advisory Council Chairman Vivek Debroy said that in order to increase the efficiency of the overall public expenditure, there needs to be a decision-making body that would keep a check on the expenditure. The chairman also mentioned that there are fiscal consolidation issues that limit gains on public expenditure, but a focused and strategic expenditure by central and state governments could yield efficiency gains. On this edition of The Big Picture, we will analyze the need and likely impact of a public spending council. Joining me on the program today are A.K. Bhattacharya, Editorial Director of the Business Standard, and Sushil Chandra Tripathi, former Principal Secretary Finance, Uttar Pradesh. Thank you to both my guests for joining me on this edition of The Big Picture. Mr. Tripathi, I'd like to begin the program with you. What are your thoughts on a public spending council on the lines of the GST Council?
I think Mr. Vivek Debroy is no longer with Niti Aayog. I read in newspapers that in June he left the Niti Aayog. You see, as long as the Planning Commission was there, to some extent, this activity was coordinated by Planning Commission because they used to have meetings with the state governments, and they also used to have members going to various state capitals and meeting with the state representatives and state governments and bringing about what is the objective, the efficiency in public expenditure and speeding up public expenditure and directing public expenditure in the desired areas to achieve the objective. It seems that the Niti Aayog perhaps is not being very effective. That is one. Number two, you see, our constitution is essentially federal in nature. Yes, it is not federal in the sense that states did not come into being first and then they formed union like they did in United States. Here the center has the overriding powers, and center can create states and also can abrogate states or make them union territories under Article 3. So center has overriding power, but essentially the spirit of the constitution, as has been described in various chapters on center-state relations, administrative, legislative and financial, is that in the areas that the states have the jurisdiction, they will carry out the expenditure. Of course, in raising revenue, the constitution was amended for bringing the GST Council and making GST as we see today. But it took about 15 years to bring the states on board and to carry out the amendment. But expenditure is not like raising revenue. You see, there are, in raising revenue, states have about 1 or 2 ministers, so you have a GST Council of Ministers from states, which will be comprising representatives of the states, so about 30-40 people. In expenditure, there are at least 20-30 ministers in each state. So you will have a council of 500 ministers. How will this council work? And then secondly, the expenditure is an everyday affair. It's on the ground situation that you need to solve problems. Sometimes there are problems of land acquisition, sometimes there are problems of delay, sometimes problems of not being able to formulate a proper scheme. So all these things require day-to-day management. So it is not simple. What I suggest is, of course, it is possible that Niti Aayog or somebody like an expenditure commission, Center State Expenditure Commission, can give directives that and lay down the priorities, that expenditure should be prioritized in this fashion. We used to do in states about 20-25 years ago, and the states always had difficulty of resources. They were always having problems in enough resources to meet the various objectives and various schemes. So we used to prioritize which are the expenditures that need to be taken up first, where there is an additionality of resources, for example, externally aided projects, centrally sponsored projects, central sector projects, then planned projects, and of course maintenance of assets, even if they were non-planned.
Right.
So something like that can be worked out but you know, it cannot be done everything from Delhi.
Sure.
They need to move to state headquarters, sit down with the people there, ministers and secretaries, heads of departments, and see why expenditure is not taking place either efficiently or in the desired areas, and what are the problems, to be able to sit down with them, solve the problems. If it is a problem of resources,
right,
then to work out schemes and also to get further accommodation either from Reserve Bank or from central government, or to develop schemes for external assistance, etc., or institutional finance.
Right.
So it's a matter of detail. It cannot
it's a
be
matter
done,
of detail. It cannot be done, you know.
Manner.
All right. Let me take the points that you're making to Mr. Bhattacharya as well. You know, it is possible to give directives. It is possible to look at the smaller picture. But if you have to do it on the scale of something like the GST Council, there are going to be challenges, is what Mr. Tripathi is saying. So what then do you believe, or what shape can we see the public expenditure council taking, Mr. Bhattacharya?
Well, I think, of course, there will be challenges, and there will be severe challenges. But let me step backwards and try to contextualize why this idea of a state public spending council has been mooted. Now, till 2015 January, when the Planning Commission was in place, what used to happen was as follows. The Finance Ministry will have some funds at its disposal, which it can be spent on states as well as the central schemes, which will be spent in some states and other. And the Planning Commission will represent the interest of the states, so much so that even Planning Commission will actually invite the state chief ministers to come to Delhi and discuss what all money do you need from the center, under what provisions, and then Planning Commission will actually negotiate with the Finance Ministry to decide on what needs to be allocated, where and how, and the efficiency angle was also looked at in that way. Now, from 2015 onwards, what happened was this entire role was expropriated by the Finance Ministry, because Planning Commission was wound up. Niti Aayog did make an effort to do something by occasional visits to the state capitals, but I don't think the Niti Aayog ever substituted the Planning Commission to the extent that it was batting on behalf of the states with the Finance Ministry for allocation of those resources. So over the years, the last few years, what you have seen is that the center has also abolished the distinction between plan and non-plan. The 12th plan, which started in 2012, has ended in 2017. So now you don't have any plan scheme, you don't have any non-plan scheme. What you have is central sector schemes, which are around 300 schemes right now. Then you have a centrally sponsored scheme around 30. Now, Mr. Debroy's suggestion actually pertains to how you spend the money, resources for those 300 central sector schemes and 30 centrally sponsored schemes. Now, his question is, can those funds be spent more efficiently with better allocation and with the need of the state's specific needs be kept in mind? Now, I think in principle the idea is good, that since right now nobody is playing that role, some organization needs to step in, but whether it should be a GST council like body or not is something that has to be discussed and debated. Why I am raising this issue is because GST council has got a very interesting format in which the states cannot decide unilaterally among themselves. If all the states get together, then I think they can veto the center. But you need at least 18 to 19 states, if my memory serves me right, to actually veto a proposal from center. So if you are looking at a GST council type of a body, which is a public spending council, I would imagine the suggestion is to have a kind of a voting pattern, which given to the either a one state, one vote, or depending on the state's GSDP share or whatever, that has to be worked out. It is only then that a GST council type of body can be mooted, because if you want to decide, as Mr. Debroy mentions in his interview with this newspaper, that a scheme like health, how do you spend money on health, on the on which states and how?
Right.
Now, yes, I think in theory, if you have a GST council kind of a body where the state health ministers or the state chief minister comes and discusses with the finance minister of the country, or even the prime minister can come in there and discuss and sort it out, provided there is a proper voting mechanism, because these things, if you want to honor the principle of cooperative federalism, then you need to follow the principle of GST council voting pattern.
Absolutely.
If you don't, then you go back to the planning commission days, wherein you will find the same criticism against planning commission that the current prime minister had raised when he was the chief minister of Gujarat.
Right.
That, what is this going on, that I am called to Delhi and told that, look, this is what you need to do, this is what you don't need to do. So therefore, I don't think this idea should mean we revert to planning commission days. This idea should mean we should go forward to a new structure wherein the states have more than equal share in the voting pattern of this new body, so that the center cannot run away with the ball.
Sure.
I think that would be a true goal that is worth achieving.
Absolutely. All right. Also joining us on the program now is Surendranath Tripathi, Director, Indian Institute of Public Administration. Welcome and thank you for joining me. Taking the discussion forward now, let's remember that not all items on the public expenditure list are on the concurrent list. So why will any of the state governments give up on their sovereignty to the center?
You are absolutely right that why should somebody give his power or her power? It's absolutely okay. But GST council system, which is a truly federal body where states are represented, government of India is also represented, and all the decisions are taken mostly by consensus. When a uniformity of 17 taxes could be merged together by this body, so GST council has proved to be a very successful federal structure where we have been able to decide contentious issue with consent. So therefore, there is a talk that why not this institutional structure is replicated for other bodies, which is not only truly federal, but also accommodates the views of the various stakeholders. Like you have just said, ki resource gap is there, expenditure management is not the only option. You are perfectly right, because there are variations within state to state. Fiscal deficit is not the only thing that need to be targeted for any expenditure. It is the resource gap between the state. The resources available in Meghalaya may not be the same the way they are available in, let's say, Himachal, or for that purpose UP. So point is a very good idea that GST council, where decisions are taken by consensus, where state and center are represented almost on the same table, and it is not that the earlier planning commission where resources are allocated and then you are allowed to spend according to your own priorities. This will be mechanism which is needed for only national priorities things, because we can't discuss law and order or for how to manage the panchayat in a particular state. But yes, education, agriculture and such other things which are having a wider connotation, they can certainly be addressed, and GST council type arrangement would be a really good idea.
Okay, all right. So that having been said, Mr. S.C. Tripathi, how do we bring about optimal utilization of public expenditure, if not through a public spending council?
Well, from the discussion, it appears that the consensus is that not all areas and not all the state expenditure schemes, but more towards the concurrent list subjects which are national priorities and objectives, for example, healthcare, education, agriculture, irrigation, etc. There, the ministries formulate schemes after having consultations with the state governments. How much consultation they have and whether they have consultation with every state is left to the ministry. There, of course, I think this idea will be workable. There they should have specific ministry-wise councils so that they formulate schemes in tandem with the schemes that the state governments have, and so that they optimize the utilization of resources, and also there is efficiency in use of resources, and the schemes can be different for different states depending on their conditions and their requirements. So I think what can be worked out is ministry-wise councils, because otherwise, as I said, it will be a very unwieldy council with 500 ministers. Ministry-wise councils, so there will be about 30-40 people, about 29 or 30 state ministers and some UTs, and the ministries. Their schemes and the state schemes in that sector, they should be they should be discussed in detail, hashed out, and if possible, not the same scheme in everywhere, but depending on the requirements of the states and the center can work together which scheme will be more useful in which state, and of course meeting the same objective, the broader national objective. So I think that can be worked out and that should be taken up rather than taking the entire budget of central government and entire budget of state government in respect of expenditure to be taken up by a council.
All right.
So that is my suggestion.
Okay, all right. Mr. Bhattacharya, this is not the first time that a suggestion like this has been made. The then finance minister in the previous term of the Modi government had made this announcement and had mooted this particular idea. It has come about yet again. Let's go to the bottom or the root of the cause. It's probably because of the economic slowdown kind of situation that we witnessed over the last few months.
That's right.
That having been said, a council like this, do you believe, can address the problem of the economy that we're going through right now?
Well, to a great extent, in my view, it can. Let us once again understand why is there some sort of a discontentment over the manner in which the center is distributing this money to the states under central sector schemes as well as the centrally sponsored schemes. Now, not for once am I suggesting that the GST council kind of a body, a public spending council as you have mentioned, should have each different ministers and different bodies. I think for efficiency's sake, it will be a good idea to have a public spending council where the finance minister can be, since he is the person in charge of spending, can be the chairperson as it is in the GST council, and you have the chief ministers of various states, 30, 31, and other union territories of the you come and be part of that spending council. And if there are, as I said, there are about 300 central sector schemes, there are 30 central sponsored schemes. Now the discussion can take place, need not necessarily be on the same day, but it can do state, on a weekly basis or a 15-day basis, you complete that discussion. So I think the important point here is that what is happening right now is the finance ministry, the expenditure finance committee of the finance ministry is deciding for the entire all the 30 states that which state will get what in a manner that the states are clearly not very happy about. Now you cannot replace a body like the planning commission and say that the same job will be done by a few people in the expenditure finance committee. So I think this idea, the public spending council, it is an idea whose time has indeed come, because not only do you have a problem from the finance ministry's overall approach to the way money has to be handed out, but what kind of need-based allocation have to be made is something that this public spending council can actually look at. So therefore, I would envisage a public spending council that has representation at the chief minister's level. You may have meetings like you used to have earlier with the planning commission, where the chief minister would come, and he did not replicate the entire GST council kind of a format, that one meeting and it is over.
Right.
So you have state by state meetings, maybe 5 states or 3 states together, if they are contiguous states, and then that public spending council can decide on what is to be spent and in what way.
Sure.
Remember, there's a very important timeline that we are looking at. Remember that 2020 March is going to be the time where there's a sunset clause for the bulk of those schemes that were started in 2016 after planning commission was wound up. Now the first deadline was the end of the formal end of the planning commission 12th 5-year plan, which was 2017 March. Now that deadline was over and many of the schemes still continue. Now there is a actual fear that those schemes may continue even beyond 2020, although their financial allocations are not there. So before the 15th Finance Commission comes up with its own recommendation, which will be effective from April 2020, I would imagine that this kind of a public spending council will actually prepare the center and the states to facilitate a more smooth and more efficient transmission spending mechanism, which will not be fraught with the kind of problems that we have seen from 2016 till now.
Okay, all right. So, Mr. Surendranath Tripathi, there's another problem here. The issue of 35 members being a part of this particular council. How are you going to prioritize what needs to take precedence over something that comes later? Maybe, Mr. Bhattacharya is suggesting that you have smaller meetings, 5 or 6 members. But with a group of about 35 members, there's going to be this kind of a problem as well on prioritizing the issues.
See, when tax integration was being discussed, similar apprehensions were being floated, that how can all state and whole of India can agree on 17 such issues. But fact remains that we delivered on that issue in consensus without any friction. So issues like agriculture development, agriculture crisis for that purpose, or education, or rural development, or growing urbanization, or today Jal Jeevan mission, these are not specific to a particular region. They are issues which are governing, which are the need and aspirations of all Indians across their geographies and localities. So on such issues, certainly we can have a common decision making process, A, and B, the GST Council success is not in terms of only associating the state, but it is the faster decision making process. Suppose for example I am giving you, one sector you need enhancement of taxation or reduction of taxation. The issues were circulated among states, they took consultation in their political and administrative process, the ministers and concerned secretaries attended the meeting and a decision was taken on this issue. So speed and scale of decision making is the another example of GST Council, which is missing in some areas, which can be bridged in these areas. Suppose National Highway, Sagarmala project, Bharatmala project, rural connectivity, all these schemes have almost, there are not much of dispute. I can understand there may be some dispute on chota mota issues which are obviously are going, we are a big federation and big democracy. But on major issues there are no disputes. So speed and scale of decision making through a Government of India led and perhaps state participated GST Council type is the idea whose time has come.
Absolutely. Optimization is everything at the end of the day, and that's what the people also want to see. And we hope that we move in that particular direction. All right, closing comments now from all my guests on the best way forward. Starting first with you, Mr. S.C. Tripathi.
Well, I think the two-tier system would be useful. One with the finance minister and Niti Aayog together, sitting with the chief ministers and state finance ministers, giving the overall priorities and also suggesting and taking advice from the states whether all the 300 central sector and 30 central sponsored schemes in equal measure are required in each and every state, or some states would like to curtail some schemes or take some other scheme, and also prioritizing the expenditure and bringing about and also suggesting how the efficiency of expenditure could be improved. The other tier I am suggesting is the ministry wise, because the schemes require details and the details cannot be discussed in large meetings of chief ministers. Many chief ministers may not know many of the 300 central sector schemes. So the detailed schemes and what are the requirements of different states under different schemes. That, for example, I was looking after I in fact started Sub-Shiksha Abhiyan, and Kerala said that our schools, government schools are closing because we don't have enough number of children. So what is required by Kerala is not required by Bihar, or what is required by Bihar is not required by Kerala. So these things can be discussed only in the ministerial level meetings, sectoral meetings. So two-tier structure needed, and I do agree that we need to speed up public expenditure and we need to improve the efficiency of public expenditure.
All right, Mr. Bhattacharya?
Well, I broadly agree with what Mr. Tripathi said, but I also add that probably A good outcome will be achieved if this Public Spending Council understands the importance that expenditure for a scheme that is going to be implemented in a state must bear in mind the ground realities of that state, the requirements of that state.
Sure.
So therefore, it is important and incumbent on the part of this new body to, instead of being confined to New Delhi, and like GST Council, 99% of its meetings are held in Delhi. Now, probably it is a fiscal matter, it is possible and it is worked. But I think the new spending council that we are talking about must realize that if it has to decide on the spending on a state like Uttar Pradesh or a spending on a state like Madhya Pradesh, must decide to relocate that meeting in Madhya Pradesh capital Bhopal or Indore.
Sure.
So that you get a sense of the place and then you decide these things. I think it is only through that kind of a decentralized and local approach that the true efficiency levels of a spending scheme of this nature can be achieved. I think that should be kept in mind.
Absolutely. And SN Tripathi, please close the show for us with your concluding remarks.
Yeah, in fact, if common goal is development of all individuals and there are differentiated needs of different state, the question is not that this GST council will decide which tender of which bridge to be taken under which rule. Question would be decided that if all villages above 500 population will be connected. Let's say requirement is 6 lakh kilometer roads. This requires, let's say, X number of amount. All those such bigger decisions could be taken in these areas, so the nitty-gritties could be worked out later on at the state level. Even in GST council also, suppose a tax rate is reduced or enhanced, ultimately the GST acts were passed by parliament and state legislatures. So it is not that this body will immediately decide what to do tomorrow, but certainly a clear direction, a speedy decision, and a decision which favors everybody and takes everybody on board on GST council model. To me, it's a very bright idea and this must be pushed, but pushed with consent.
Okay. All right. All right, then, on that note, we'll call it a wrap on this edition of The Big Picture. Thank you to all my guests for joining me on the program and putting things into perspective for us. That's it on this edition of The Big Picture. See you again next time.